The mind that produced the most notoriously difficult, despairing poem of the 20th century also wrote the whimsical source material for a blockbuster Broadway musical. That mind belonged to T.S. Eliot, an American-born, British-naturalized literary giant whose work came to define the modern age. But his legacy is defined by a deeper set of paradoxes. Eliot was a man who wrote of profound spiritual unity and divine love, yet today he is the subject of a fierce academic debate over documented instances of anti-Semitism. How do we make sense of a historical and artistic legacy that is so thoroughly fractured? To understand Eliot, we have to read his life the way he wrote his poetry. We have to examine 4 distinct, seemingly disconnected fragments to see how they assemble into a single, complex picture of the modern mind. Fragment 1 begins in 1921. Europe was a landscape of ruins, and Eliot's personal life was no different. He was suffering a nervous breakdown while trapped in a deeply miserable marriage. He drafted the poem that would define this despair while recuperating in Margate and Switzerland. He then handed the manuscript to the poet Ezra Pound, whose aggressive editing stripped away every bit of traditional narrative structure. Eliot called this his mythical method. He abandoned linear storytelling, instead mashing together the ancient Fisher-King myth, the high culture of Shakespeare, and the lowbrow grit of overheard pub conversations. This forced his readers to jump between completely unrelated voices and time periods without warning. This jarring style wasn't just an artistic experiment, it was a mirror. It was the only way to capture the psychological reality of a ruined, traumatized civilization. Then, in 1939, we find an entirely different fragment, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. These verses began as light-hearted letters sent to his godchildren, focusing entirely on feline mannerisms, social hierarchies, and humorous naming conventions. For a man who had diagnosed the world's chaos in his youth, these poems provided a necessary psychological escape. He was seeking out rigid structure and simple, predictable joy to balance the wasteland he had previously documented. By the early 1940s, global trauma had returned. As Eliot served as a fire watcher during the London Blitz, he began his final great synthesis, 4 quartets. He looked for a way to reconcile the world's destruction, intertwining his own Western Anglo-Catholicism with the Eastern philosophy of the Hindu Bhagavad Gita. In his earlier work, time was a trap that led only to decay. But in these poems, Eliot argues that we can discover eternity by focusing entirely on the still point of the present moment. By framing a world at war against these eternal, recurring patterns, Eliot moved beyond documenting the ruins. He began proposing a way to actually endure them. But to see the whole man, we have to look past the poetry. Modern scholars are currently engaged in a fierce debate over the historical reality of Eliot's own prejudices. The evidence is contradictory. We have a newly discovered cache of letters proving Eliot worked to help Jewish refugees resettle in Britain. And we have a body of work containing deeply anti-Semitic texts and caricatures. Eliot was a flawed product of his era, actively wrestling with the same human chaos and moral failures that he attempted to navigate in his poetry. The depressed poet, the whimsical author of cat verses, and the subject of modern controversy are all components of one identity, a single human mind attempting to process a century of global trauma. The Wasteland showed us the wreckage. 4 quartets looked for a way to reconcile it, and his personal life proves that even the architects of our culture are painfully human. Ultimately, Eliot suggests that a meaningful life is not found in an intact world, but in the effort to take the heap of broken images we are handed and find a way to shore them against our ruins.